So we've got a slightly revised schedule. Before we hear from these wonderful witnesses who have already been diverted from last week, we just want to try and get approval of the joint statement, which would go out, I think, tomorrow morning, given that it's not going to get out this afternoon. I think it's being translated and getting finished off. I'm just going to give MP Sweet a chance to poke through. Who are we missing? Marwan. Agreed. Okay, so the joint statement has been agreed and approved, and will go out. Oh, you're reading it. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry, how did we determine what is the content of this brief? Is it just based on witness testimony? And so, I mean, I'm pretty sure the witness testimony was a lot more expansive than this, so how did we select these specific paragraphs?
So, yes, it was based on witness testimony. What we tried to do was to give the broad strokes. So let's say yesterday we had Mr. Raisi discuss family law. Instead of going into detail, we just highlighted the rights of women and children, for instance. So that was an example of how we would give the broad strokes of very specific information.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. Okay. But was like rights of women, girls, and sexual minorities, that was something that was brought up by multiple witnesses, or just the one?
So we had Mr. Raisi. It was also developed upon by Mr. Akavan as well. So it was more than one witness.
Okay. And as the incitement for anti-Semitism, that was again brought up by multiple witnesses?
So anti-Semitism came up in the context of minorities more generally, and specifically with the Holocaust cartoon contest. That was kind of the big exclamation point upon which the anti-Semitism comment was made.
Right. Okay.
So I'd like to welcome our honored guests here today. And again, thank you for rescheduling and coming back in to be with us. From Inter Pares, we've got Rebecca Walsack. She's the program manager, and Kevin Malseed, also the program manager. From Amnesty International, we've got Alex Nave, Secretary General, Amnesty International Canada. And as an individual, we've got Abid Bahar, professor from Dawson College. So given our timeline, let's if we can get right into the introductions, that would be fabulous, and then we'll move on to questions. Thank you for being here. Sure, we can start with Inter Pares, then Mr. Neve, then Abid.
Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. Interpares is an Ottawa-based international social justice organization, and we've been working with people from Burma for over 20 years, often with significant support from the Government of Canada. Today, I will build on some of the really great testimony that you've already heard and make 4 recommendations before my colleague Kevin will share information about the camps. When studying the human rights situation for Rohingya, it's important to look at the bigger picture. Decades of military rule and active combat and extensive control over resources and information has been devastating. Burma's dictators had a vision to build one nation with one race and one religion. Propaganda has nurtured prejudice against people of different ethnicities and religions. Approximately 40% of the population are not Burman. They identify as ethnic nationalities. These people live in areas where conflict has raged in a desperate attempt by the military to control the people. While Aung San Suu Kyi has led a democracy movement that most of us are familiar with, the parallel struggle for ethnic people to have control over their own lives, their struggle for a federal democracy, is less understood. The new NLD government took office last month, but behind the scenes, the military still has a firm grip on much of the country. Progress towards peace, towards freedom of religion, and towards a decentralized state is slow and stumbling. There are legitimate fears about the political will of the NLD, and there are significant constraints put upon them by the military-drafted constitution. Within this context, the systematic oppression of the Rohingya has been extreme. Historically, the government and military have played a role in stoking people's fears and provoking anger against Rohingya. In recent years, these efforts have broadened to target all Muslims in Burma. There is a particular case with the Rohingya, though, and in part it stems from a fear that by using the name Rohingya, this will lead to recognizing them as an ethnicity. And in turn, this will come with special rights and may lead to a demand for a state of their own. This fear is not founded on any loud movement of Rohingya calling for a state of their own. It is hypothetical. But in Burma today, land is an extremely contentious issue. In Burma, Rohingya are predominantly seen as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, though, Rohingya are seen as illegal immigrants from Burma. When the NLD talks about the importance of the rule of law and appoints a former Major General as the Minister of Immigration, they are signaling to some that they intend to crack down on illegal Bengalis. And when people are talking about nationalist movements, such as the so-called Buddhist movements or the Arakan National Party, they are speaking of the desire to maintain current citizenship laws and expel Rohingya. As members of Parliament, I ask you to imagine the predicament of Burma's MPs, chosen by an electorate that is at best ignorant of the plight of Rohingya. There is value in loud external pressure, when the pressure doesn't come from within your riding. The louder it is, the easier it would be for them to take a stand. Canada needs to play this role. Our recommendations are that 1, Canada must use the name Rohingya publicly and often. The right to self-identify should not be controversial. This comes at a risk, but we cannot be complicit. Number 2, Canada must help the new government by publicly pushing for changes to the citizenship law and the Constitution. Number 3, Canada must ensure engagement is balanced, support this new government, be critical of the military, and support ethnic civil society. And number 4, Canada should welcome Rohingya refugees that are being held in detention centres in Malaysia. Kevin?
Thank you. I've been in contact with Rohingya people and issues since 1992, when the Burmese military mounted a major pogrom against them that drove 300,000 refugees into Bangladesh. But today I want to talk mainly about my visit to Sidwe, capital of Arakan State, just over 2 months ago. To clarify, in Sidwe area, almost all Rohingyas were forced from their homes into displacement camps, unlike further north in Arakan State, where Rohingyas still live in their home communities, though under heavy restrictions. When you fly into Sitwe Airport, the first thing you encounter are large signs listing areas where foreigners are not allowed to go, including entire townships where Muslims live, and a reference to, quote, Bengali quarters, end quote, in and around Sitwe itself. In the town itself, you can't miss the huge new golden Buddhist temples being built. The mosques are harder to find, even the large ones on the main streets, because they're now barricaded with barbed wire and police boxes, overgrown and slowly crumbling. The clear intent is to impress upon everyone that this is a staunchly, exclusively Buddhist place, even though it never was. Since 2012, the Rohingyas have been driven out of the neighborhoods where they lived, except one, Ong Mingla quarter, where they are penned in by barbed wire and police. The neighborhoods they were forced to abandon are also surrounded by barbed wire, but are now covered in the makeshift shacks of Arakanese squatters, mostly poor people who've moved into town from the countryside. Authorities ordered that no one should move into these areas, but have done nothing to prevent it. Tens of thousands of Rohingyas forced out of Sitwe are now in camps 8 or 10 kilometers outside of town. Going to this area is difficult past army camps and military and police checkpoints. The camps lie in an area of Rohingya villages that were established here when the military corralled Rohingyas here in the early 1990s in a previous program. These people eventually managed to set up village-like environments, and the new displacement camps are in rice fields near these villages. Rohingyas can move around between the camps and villages, but cannot leave this area, not even to go to town. To do so, they need police permission, almost impossible to obtain. In contrast, Arakanese Buddhists are free to enter and move around the Rohingya area without permission, and there are persistent fears that radical mobs could easily attack the unprotected camps. There are many camps. I visited 3. 2 of these were, quote, registered camps, end quote. Each houses several thousand people in very rudimentary bamboo longhouses with dirt floors. Keep in mind, these are proud people who in many cases had modern houses in town and their own shops or fishing boats. Here they can receive a basic monthly rice ration from the World Food Program. Save the Children has built basic drainage, wells, and latrines and runs small so-called temporary learning spaces which aren't even allowed to be called schools. They get nothing else. There's one small government health clinic, but it only has a doctor for an hour a week and no medicines. I met 2 people who are slowly dying for lack of medical care, a man who looked more like a skeleton and a woman whose entire jaw has been eaten away by infection and who can no longer eat. Médecins Sans Frontières and other international NGOs are no longer allowed to provide medical assistance in the camps I visited. Those who become very seriously ill can ask permission to travel to Sitwe Hospital in town, but there they are segregated in a ward with 1 nurse and no doctors, essentially left to die. The hospital even created a separate blood bank for this ward after Arakanese Buddhists protested in fear that they might be accidentally given Muslim blood. If people in the camps need clothing or medicines, they have no choice but to sell their rations to get money. I met a young couple with a 1-year-old baby who had to sell 2 months of the family's ration to buy medicines when the mother fell ill. All 3 are now starving, living only on what neighbors can spare from their own rations. The so-called unregistered camps are even worse. To explain, when the waves of anti-Muslim violence forced people into these camps in 2012, many Rohingyas were trapped in their villages or town neighborhoods, surrounded by armed mobs and Burmese military. They only reached the camps 3 or 4 months later, by which time the government authorities said registration was already closed, so they could not be counted. As a result, they had to build shelter on the most flood-prone land with no help. Their shelters are regularly flooded or destroyed by storms or cyclones. Worst of all, they're not allowed to receive any rations, which means they have to survive by begging among other Rohingyas, acting as bicycle rickshaw drivers between the camps or however they can. Conditions in these camps are even more desperate, unsanitary, and prone to malnutrition. And people I met here had lost family members to diarrhea or dysentery without treatment. Can the Burmese government resolve this situation? That will take a lot of pressure because it's largely the Burmese government that created it. The most recent Thein Sein government revived anti-Muslim rhetoric and violence as a means of nation building. Its police and the military stood by or actively joined in violence against Muslims. His government facilitated the rise of the 969 and Mabatha radical anti-Muslim movements by allowing and supporting their rallies while cracking down on all other forms of public demonstration. The new NLD government is clearly afraid to anger these movements, which is why the NLD party refused to run a single Muslim candidate in the 2015 election and has been reticent on human rights for Rohingyas ever since. This is a situation where concerted international pressure is necessary to create change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Neve.
Moving right along, there's obviously been unparalleled change leading to considerable hope in Myanmar in recent years. And the new NLD government led by Aung San Suu Kyi now faces enormous challenges in addressing considerable human rights challenges, not just because of their scale and and how entrenched they are, but also in light of the considerable political and economic powers that the Myanmar military still retains. One of the most serious challenges is obviously the need to address the plight of the Rohingya Muslim minority who have suffered state-sponsored discrimination and violence for decades. In 2012, renewed violence erupted between Buddhists, Rohingya, and other Muslim groups in Rakhine State. It led to scores of deaths and destruction of property. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. Tensions between Buddhist and Muslim communities spread, and in 2013 and 2014, predominantly anti-Muslim attacks erupted in several towns across the country, while groups promoting advocacy of hatred and incitement to discrimination against Muslims grew in influence. Today, an estimated 118,000 individuals, mostly Rohingya, remain displaced in Rakhine State. Most live in squalid conditions, as you've heard, in internally displaced person camps and unofficial temporary shelters, with no sustained access to adequate food, medical care, sanitation facilities, and other essential humanitarian assistance. This is in part because of government-imposed restrictions which prohibit displaced people from leaving the camps, and in part due to severe restrictions on national and international NGOs' ability to access certain populations and areas. Authorities also impose severe restrictions on the Rohingya who live outside the IDP camps. That includes restrictions on freedom of movement, which require official permission to travel between villages and townships in North Rakhine State. Most individuals are not permitted to travel elsewhere in the state unless there is a very serious medical emergency. The restrictions on movement have serious repercussions on the Rohingyas' rights, severely limiting their access to livelihoods, health care, food security, and education. Rohingya are also required to obtain permission to marry. When they do marry, they are required to sign a document agreeing to limit any children they may have to 2. A ban on more than 4 Muslims gathering in a public place also effectively prevents them from practicing their religion. Many mosques across Rakhine State have remained closed since the 2012 violence. These restrictions are coupled with discrimination and violence at the hands of security forces. Amnesty International has documented widespread extortion by security forces and continues to receive reports of violence, including beatings, torture, and other ill treatment in detention. Security forces arbitrarily arrest Rohingya, particularly Rohingya leaders. The Rohingya are deprived of a nationality under Myanmar's 1982 Citizenship Act, which rendered the vast majority of them ineligible to be full Myanmar citizens. The authorities have adopted other recent measures which entrench this exclusion. In March of 2014, the government effectively excluded the majority of the Rohingya from Myanmar's first national census since 1983 by backtracking on a promise to allow them to call themselves Rohingya in the census forms. A February 2015 presidential order revoked all temporary registration certificates, known locally as white cards, leaving many Rohingya without any form of accepted identity document, a move that meant that most Rohingya were barred from voting in the November 2015 general election. Almost all Rohingya candidates who had applied to contest the November elections were disqualified on discriminatory citizenship grounds. The adoption of a package of laws aimed at, quote, protecting race and religion is also of real concern. The 4 laws, the Religious Conversion Law, the Myanmar Buddhist Women's Special Marriage Law, the Population Control Healthcare Law, and the Monogamy Law, have many provisions which discriminate on multiple grounds, including gender, religion, and marital status. All of this takes place in a broader context of growing religious intolerance in the country, with advocacy of hatred and incitement to discrimination, hostility, and violence by Buddhist extremist groups, largely unaddressed and unchallenged by the authorities. Worryingly, people who do speak out against hardline religious and nationalistic views have also faced retaliation from the state and non-state actors, including threats, harassment, and even arrest. This grave human rights and humanitarian situation, the pervasive discrimination and restrictions, the increasing advocacy of hatred, has pushed growing numbers of people to flee from Myanmar over the last couple of years. The UNHCR estimates that 33,600 people, most believed to be Rohingya, fled from the Bay of Bengal in 2015. Following a crackdown on human smugglers and traffickers in Thailand in May of last year, thousands of migrants and asylum seekers at risk of abuse landed in Indonesia and Malaysia in unseaworthy boats. The Myanmar government continues to refuse to acknowledge this situation. That was well demonstrated just in March of this year at the United Nations Human Rights Council, when Myanmar was being reviewed as part of the Universal Periodic Review and rejected all 27 recommendations made to the government by other countries relating to the Rohingya situation. Amnesty International urges the Canadian government to press the following 7 recommendations with Myanmar authorities. First, to ensure free and unimpeded access to Rakhine State to humanitarian actors, the UN, international human rights organizations, and journalists. Second, to ensure Rohingya have equal, non-discriminatory access to citizenship and are not rendered stateless. Third, to revoke all local orders which place arbitrary and discriminatory restrictions on Rohingya in North Rakhine State, in particular, removing all restrictions on freedom of movement. Fourth, to accede without reservation to the 1954 Convention relating to the status of stateless persons and the 1961 Convention on the reduction of statelessness. Fifth, conduct impartial and independent investigations into all incidents of anti-Muslim violence and ensure that those found responsible of such violence or advocacy of hatred are held to account in fair trials. 6, repeal or substantively revise all protecting race and religion laws to bring them into compliance with international human rights standards. And finally, Canada should work with other governments to ensure that the rights of Rohingya refugees are fully respected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bahar?
First of all, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak out about the current human rights situation of the Rohingya in Myanmar. So far, the speakers before me, honorable speakers, covered what is going on in today's Burma. As a researcher myself, I would say I'm an ancient researcher. I have been researching on the Rohingya people from 1978. And my thesis, done from Canada, was on what was going on in those times. So I'm testifying here in the capacity of a researcher, and this has been going on for 40 years. I've been involved with them for the past 40 years. So I just want to take you to what happened in those days, because things that we see today is not something that happened only in the past few years. It has been going on for so many years. It is important to know a little bit of background to this. I will not go into details. So in 1978, I was teaching at the University of Chittagong, and we had the news that about 200,000 Rohingya refugees came to take shelter in southern Chittagong, which is adjacent to Burma. And it was quite a big news, both locally in Bangladesh and in the neighboring countries. Also, it became an international news. So I decided to visit the place with some of my students, and we went to a camp called Ukiah Camp, and I saw a sea of tents accommodating refugees. So I interviewed some of the refugees. There were a lot of people around us, and that was in 1978. And I asked some refugees what was the reason that Burmese government evicted them to Bangladesh. So they said, we are illegals, they think, but we have documents that we are Burmese citizens. So I asked them to show us the documents. It's called NRC. And little children and adults went to their parents, some adults. They brought documents, a lot of them. It showed that they were Burmese citizens. And then after that, I came to Canada, and I did my master's thesis on the Rohingya. But in the meantime, in 1982, the government of Burma passed a constitutional act in 1982, and it confirmed. It said Rohingya people in general are illegals in Burma. And in 1993, they sent out about 300,000 people. This time they made sure that they don't carry any NRC cards. So this continues. And it has been happening, and I encountered a lot of Rohingya people, Rohingya leaders, and some local people, farmers, and all kinds of people. And I saw the frustration in them because it has been going on for such a long time. The Burmese military, starting from Nevin, was destroying their houses and killing people. So one Rohingya told me that he was told by a Burmese military personnel that we are not going to kill all of you. We are killing all of you to scare you so that you leave our country because you don't belong to Burma. And the reason why the Rohingyas were targeted is that, you see, in Burma, most people are Buddhist. And Rohingyas are both are Muslims, and a small minority are Hindu people. Very small minority. I met some of them in Montreal, even in Quebec City. So it's a big trouble for Burma to keep this with that mentality, to tolerate Rohingya people because they are different. Whereas Karens are Christians, a part of them, who are not tolerable, but with Rohingya, it's a double trouble. So that is what is the scenario here. I will cover some key issues here to contextualize the issues. Number one is that we have to understand that it's a fault line, racial fault line it's called, which means that it's Rohingyas live, or Arakan is in the border of South Asia and Southeast Asia. It's a divide, racial divide. So in Bangladesh, which was in British time, it was it was the British Empire, whereas after the independence of these two countries, it became a racial fault line, which means on this side it's Indo-Semitic mostly people live in Bangladesh, and on the other side it's Mongoloid and Buddhist. So the whole thing should be understood not as a religious problem, but both religious and racial. It's a racial problem. Before I began my research, most people were saying that it was a religious problem between Muslims and Buddhists. But it is a racial problem, and this is a race relations problem. And the second concept I want to introduce here is that Arakan's inter-ethnic relations is characterized by a kind of triangle, which is you have the local Rohingya and Rakhine in Arakan, and then you have the Burmans controlling from the mainland. So that is another issue that complicates the entire situation. To go back to a few other things, we might think it's just a new phenomenon and what is going on here. Actually, it began, Rakhines and Rohingyas lived together in peace for years, for centuries. But there was an event took place a long time ago. It was the Mughal prince who was given shelter in Arakan. At that time, Arakan was an independent kingdom. And the Mughal prince, who was Shah Shuja, him and his entire family was brutally killed in Arakan. And then the Muslims living there and the Buddhists, they started to face problems. That was the beginning of the end of fraternity between Muslims and the Buddhists. And ever since, Muslims are being pushed out of Arakan, and there were a lot of troubles going on. We had no information about it. So in addition to what is happening today, as a researcher, I want to testify that the problem has deep roots, and they have to be understood. We cannot solve it without understanding what happened in the past. And education is a very important thing that has to be done in Burma to accommodate so that human rights education could be integrated in Burmese society in the way that they understand that in a multicultural, multi-ethnic country, minorities have to be respected, they have to be given their rights, and that should include Aung San Suu Kyi, who should also understand that it is a necessity, it is a precondition to have a democratic society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bahar. And with that, MP Sweet, if you'd like to start the first question.
Thank you, Chair. The testimony around the Rohingya doesn't get any easier to consume, even though this is an update and a study. Mr. Malseed, you mentioned a visit, and you listed in all of your remarks a number of things. We got groups who were inciting hatred, unrestrained, police who participated in brutal violence against the Rohingya, no medical care, little to no food, isolation with barbed wire, no education. I mean, you know, anybody without restraining myself, but these would seem to be the seeds of genocide.
Yes,
I'm not suggesting. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to put you on the spot in that regard, but what I'm saying is this issue is, you know, next to the maybe the Syrian conflict that is an open battle. This is one of the worst human rights situations in the world right now. Am I overstating it?
No, I don't think you are. I fully agree with that. In terms of the discussion of genocide, I think, you know, different people have posited that, yes, the seeds of genocide are there. Either way, if you consider it genocide, or even for those who don't consider it genocide, it is, like you say, definitely one of the absolute worst human rights situations in the world. And when you're there, I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like to live there as a Rohingya, but even just being there and seeing it is, I've worked in human rights for 25 years and it was very difficult. I also met after the visit with a Canadian diplomat at the embassy in Yangon who had recently visited Rohingya communities in Arakan State. And even when we started discussing our two experiences, even when she started describing her experience, at one point she couldn't speak anymore. She had to stop.
Understandable. So the other thing I'm gravely concerned about, and this is all I have actually, Chair, is Ms. Walsek, you mentioned that you had some fears that there was not the political will in this new government. That is probably the one, you know, I mean, the consequence of what happened to Rohingya are desperate, what you already said, but that's the most troubling thing I've heard. Can you elaborate on that, what your main concerns are?
Sure. In the last few weeks, we have seen Aung San Suu Kyi request that the U.S. ambassador not use the word Rohingya. We have seen the NLD continue some of the same problematic, oppressive patterns that we had in the past. So, for example, the verification process, the national verification process that was part of the census that Alex mentioned, has begun again. It was halted in 2014, the same year it started, due to Rohingya protesting, because there's no option for them to self-identify, right? They have to identify as Bengali. And this program has started again. And as I said in my testimony, the choice of immigration minister, the choices that have been made do not bode well.
And if I could just add one more to the list, I'd repeat what I referred to in my comments about it was very troubling in March of this year to see Myanmar categorically reject all 27 recommendations made by other states. This isn't from the human rights organizations, from other states at the UN Human Rights Council in the course of its universal periodic review. The one time, it only comes around once every 4.5 years, when a government is expected to show meaningful engagement with the world community to address serious human rights concerns. That would have been the moment for the Myanmar government to demonstrate some willingness to take some positive steps forward, and they did nothing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. P. Khalid.
Thank you very much for all of your testimony today. It's very enlightening, and I really appreciate it. Mr. Neve, something that you had said in your recommendations, I just wanted to clarify. You had mentioned in your recommendations that human rights groups be given access to the Rakhine State. Can you describe what the situation is for human rights groups right now? As in, are they being restricted access into these camps, etc.? And who is restricting their access?
I'm assuming actually that Kevin might actually be able to give you more recent sort of on the ground information.
Sure.
Certainly Amnesty has not been able to have access to those areas, and that's always troubling for us in our human rights work. It doesn't mean we can't do the kind of monitoring and investigation that we need to, but obviously having on the ground access is key. There's been a number of humanitarian groups that some of which had access in the past and have now been totally denied or significantly restricted. And it's my understanding that journalists find it very difficult to get permission to travel in that area as well. But perhaps Kevin has more information that he'd share.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what efforts human rights groups have made to go in there. You can, for example, go to some of these areas and camps only if you get governmental permission, which takes some time and some connections. Some journalists can get in. It's a bit hit and miss. Human rights groups, I would suspect it's more difficult. Even the humanitarian organizations, for example, MSF was delivering some medical assistance. Then, and I don't know all the details of this, but as I had it told to me, they were ordered out of Arakan State. Then they negotiated with the government to go back into Arakan State, but in the Rohingya areas, they were told they could only deliver assistance to non-Rohingyas, and their decision was, well, if you're going to restrict us in that way, then we're not coming in, and that's why they're not able to deliver assistance within those camps. Access is very difficult, very controlled. There are checkpoints everywhere, and this is only complicated by the fact that there's still armed conflict in Arakan State between the Burmese military and the Arakan army, for example.
I'm sorry, Chair, but I think that we need to, at this point, move to adjourn.
So, as discussed previously, we have to cut this a little short today. I want to thank the witnesses for coming in. We would appreciate if there's any additional info you'd like to send into the committee, please feel free to send that to the clerk. And once again, thank you for your patience and for rescheduling from last week and for enlightening us with your testimony today. Thank you very much.